Hello, I'm David Fisher, and I'd like to welcome you to Model Mania Video, Volume 2, Beyond the Basics. In Volume 1 of our series, we covered the basics of building and painting vinyl and resin kit figures. With Volume 2, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into airbrushing as well as other advanced techniques. Over the last year, most of the letters I've received have been airbrush related. Airbrushes are great for all types of special effects in modeling, but you know, if you've never used an airbrush, going to purchase one can be an intimidating task. The simplest, most basic airbrush you can purchase is an external mix, single-action design. An external mix airbrush differs from the internal mix design in that the paint never enters the brush itself. Instead, the paint is pushed by pressure through an opening in front of the flow of air which propels it forward. The brush is easy to use, easy to clean, but it lacks control in the flow of air pressure and paint, which is not ideal for detail work. It's good for base coating, but that's about it. The workhorse of the airbrush family is the standard double-action airbrush. They come in many brands and many price ranges. By using the double action, you can control the paint and airflow separately. By pulling back on the trigger, you pull the needle away from the tip, which allows more paint to mix with the air. By pressing down on the trigger, you can increase the air pressure. The downside of this airbrush is in the maintenance. Every time you wish to change a color, you have to disassemble the brush to clean it. You must be careful never to bend the needle or tip, because then it will have to be replaced. These types of brushes are prone to clogging, but it's a good airbrush, a good tool. To demonstrate how the double-action airbrush works, you push down on the trigger to control the airflow, and pull back on the trigger to increase the flow of paint. That's down for airflow and back for flow of paint. The third type is my favorite, the Tester's Model Master airbrush. It's a double-action airbrush made of hard plastic and comes with a variety of interchangeable paint tips which screw into the front. There's a fine tip, a general purpose tip, a splatter tip, and a high flow tip. The great thing about this brush is that you don't have to disassemble it for cleaning. All you have to do is run a cup or two of airbrush thinner through it. Then you can change the colors or put it away. They're very user-friendly and ideal for modeling. It also comes with a lifetime warranty. The only downside to it is that you can't get as fine of a line as with a regular airbrush, but for modeling I find I don't usually need to spray that fine of a line. It's very quick, very easy, and foolproof. To review airbrushes, we covered three types of airbrushes. The external mix single-action airbrush provides a wide, even spray. The internal mix double action with needle, the standard in airbrushing, but high maintenance. The internal mix double action with interchangeable tips, new in design, user-friendly, and easy cleanup. After you've decided what type of airbrush best fits your needs, you're going to have to choose a source for your air pressure. You can use cans of propellant, an air tank, or an air compressor. There are three basic types of air sources for painting. The first one is can propellant. Simple to use, just attach the can to your airbrush hose. Propellant cans are easy to find but don't last very long. They also have a tendency to freeze up during painting. You can put the can in warm water to alleviate this. They can also be expensive in the long run. After 10 to 15 cans, you could have probably bought a small compressor for around the same price. But they're good for the infrequent user. Next is the air tank. You can purchase one at any hardware store. You fill the tank from a compressor, like one at a gas station. It holds a good amount of air, but the downside to it is that when pressure begins to drop, you have to stop and go fill it again, which can be very inconvenient. Still, it's a cheap alternative for the infrequent user. Third and finally, the best alternative for air pressure is the air compressor. They come in all sizes and price ranges, but for modeling, a small compressor such as this one from Tester's is ideal. It comes with a moisture trap to keep water condensation out of your line and a gauge to control the air pressure. The average pressure for spraying is around 30 to 40 pounds of pressure, depending on the thickness of paint. This type is not very expensive and in the long run is your best bet. To review the three types of air sources: cans of propellant, the air pressure doesn't last long and they're expensive over time. The air tank, inexpensive but inconvenient because of refilling. The air compressor, the most recommended source. There are all types of techniques you can do with an airbrush, from base coating parts to the finest detailings of a face. The best thing about an airbrush is its control over blending of colors. On our first tape, I showed you how to do a realistic flesh tone, but on this tape I thought I'd show you how to do an unusual flesh tone, one that might be used on an alien character or an undead figure. Certain kits come along which challenge your imagination. Vision Model's Morphess is one of them. You could paint her skin tones as a normal woman, or you could create an unusual flesh tone. I begin with my kit primed and ready to paint. I like to wear latex gloves to hold the kit and keep the oils from my fingers from getting on the surface. The first thing I do in mixing an unusual flesh color is to begin by making a master color of my basic flesh recipe. Even though I want an unusual skin tone, I still like the color to have its basis in a realistic flesh tone. I begin with raw sienna, then add equal amounts of burnt sienna, and then some white. I mix these colors together into what I like to call my master color. I take some of my master color and pour it into a separate jar, saving the rest for later. I then take my second color, in this case blue, and mix it in with the master color. This gives me my initial base tone. I then take some of the paint and put it into the cup of the airbrush. You want to thin the paint to be the consistency of milk. The first step is to base coat the kit with an even layer of color. I then take some of my master flesh color and mix a little less blue into it for a lighter shade and begin to highlight the selected areas. You want to highlight where the paint would naturally hit the figure: the tops of the shoulders, the tops of the breast, down the arms, and the tops of the thighs. You want to use a slow, subtle shade for building up of color. You don't want to bring up the highlights too quickly. I would rather take my time and have the colors build up slowly, achieving a more natural effect. I lighten the shade once again and begin to spray over the tops of the eyes, the brow, the nose, the cheeks, and the chin line. I then take the lighter shade and highlight along the abdominals, the upper arms, all the brighter raised areas. I run a little airbrush cleaner through the brush before changing colors. Sometimes I like to bring in secondary colors to create a little more interest and to keep the kit from being so monochromatic. I mix an orange coral color, which is the complementary of blue, with a medium version of my unusual flesh tone. I then pour the paint into the reservoir and lightly highlight along the cheekbones and the eyes, giving a warm, faint glow along the edge of the skin, just adding a hint of color. I finish up by heavily spraying the snakeskin area of the kit. Then I like to bring in a third color, a yellow gold. I come back and lightly spray the gold color over the skin and heavily spray it on the reptilian skin. After I've gotten all of my secondary colors worked out, I look over the kit to see if I might have a few areas where the color is too harsh. Then taking my medium skin tone and holding the airbrush back from the kit approximately 10 inches, I lightly mist the kit to soften down the colors and to blend them all together as if the colors were underneath the skin. Finally, I like to take my lightest flesh color and mix just a little more white into it to make the lightest shade for the highlights. I then return and hit the highest points to give them just a little more highlight along the stomach, the edge of the rib cage, the outer arms, and the tops of the hand. Basically, the kit is finished. Some of the colors might look a bit garish now, but I overcompensated for the brightness on some of the shades, since later I will use a glaze which will lay over the color and bring out the texture and dull down the colors a bit. For making an unusual flesh tone, begin by mixing a master color of flesh. Separate and save some of the master color for later shades. Add an unusual color such as blue, purple, or green into it. Introduce secondary shades to keep the colors from being too monochromatic. And work from dark to light. Another technique ideal for airbrushing is body markings or patterns on the skin. You can do these with a regular brush, but the soft edging provided by an airbrush gives a more realistic effect. On dinosaurs, the patterns are larger and more widespread. This is where you can let your imagination run wild. For showing body markings on dinosaurs, I'll be working with a Utah raptor from Vector Models. I begin by base coating the dinosaur with a duotone effect. This is a good starting point for reptile paint jobs. I give the upper area a warm raw sienna base coat, and I give the lower area a paler cream color. I then go down the top of the head, the spine and tail with a darker burnt sienna, which is a red-brown. I also go along the dividing line between the two base colors to give a stronger horizon pattern between the two colors. At this time, I also like to go ahead and base coat the inside of the mouth with the same color. I come back with burnt umber, spraying down the top of the head, the spine, slowly building up the shades of color. I also like to bring out a little stronger color around that horizon line, and also along the feet and the front of the legs. Next, I take a very dark olive green and start spraying patterns along the dinosaur's back. I use a fairly large spot for this, but do try to vary the size and shape to make them more realistic. I layer black on top of the olive for depth of shading in the spots. The airbrush is ideal for this since it gives you a nice, soft, realistic effect as opposed to the hard edge spots that a brush would give. The airbrush is also ideal for achieving transparent wing effects on kits such as the Jersey Devil from Sideshow Productions. Even though the wings are solid resin, with paint you can make them look translucent as if light passes through them. This kit has been base coated with a burnt umber. I then take that base color and I lighten it with a little raw sienna and a little white. I begin by spraying the center area of each wing segment. It's best to start spraying from the center outward toward the edge, since you want to leave some of the shading along the structure of the wing. I then lighten my color once again using white and spray toward the center. I build up the lighter color over the dark. Let the highlights fade out toward the center of the edge. I come back with a lighter shade once again and do an irregular highlighting in the center of the wing to give sort of a membrane effect, as if the light was passing through an uneven object. I then come back with a small brush and add veins to the wings. Taking a thinned down raw sienna, I warm up the color of the wings, slightly misting over the veins to make it look as if they are lying beneath the surface. Finally, I come back with my lighter shade and give an irregular highlight. Work from dark to light and highlight from the center area and fade to the outer edge. Spray the spots in layers. For small spots, reduce the air pressure. Testors makes a splatter tip available for the Model Master airbrush. This creates a speckled effect, which is great for things like stone or my favorite, cloth. This segment demonstrates what a splatter tip can achieve. By adding very light air pressure, you can make small dots. By increasing the air and paint flow, you can increase the dot so it becomes a dense speckled texture. The Mad Love kit from Dimensional Designs is ideal for showing this splatter tip texture on clothing. He is wearing a large overcoat which will be great for this effect. The splatter tip will give a nice tweed or wool fabric texture. I begin by base coating the area with black. I then mix a charcoal gray, and with the splatter tip, I begin to highlight along the folds of the fabric, controlling the pressure as to not get too dense of a dot pattern. You just want to work the whole area of the cloth. This gives a nice textured look to the clothing. You want to follow the natural folds of the fabric, more highlights on the raised area of the clothing and less in the folds. You can always come back and build up with light shades to achieve the desired effect you want. This splatter tip is also great for items such as the couch from Atomic Creations' Vampira kit. Giving texture to the cushions adds a little more of a three-dimensional realism to the job. By base coating the couch a dark red and then mixing a lighter shade of red, I begin by highlighting over the sections of the cushions. Take your time and follow the actual shapes, paying attention to where the light and shadows would naturally hit the cushions. Again, taking a lighter shade of red, I begin to go over the raised areas of the couch and building up the layers of colors. For splatter tip effects, remember, work from dark to light, control the pressure of the airbrush so that you don't get too dense a pattern of dots. When using metallic paints, many factors have to be considered to get the right effect with the right paint. How do you shade with metallics? There are certain tricks and techniques you can use for airbrushing metallics. I'm going to demonstrate how I airbrush metallics using Volx's Commando kit from their Soriyama Gynoid series. Spraying with metallics is like dry brushing with metallics. You begin by base coating the kit with a dark color such as black or brown. I've masked off the skin areas of the kit with a mold builder liquid latex because sometimes it's hard to spray over the metallic surface with regular colors. All the paints I'm using are metallic acrylic enamels. I like to mix my metallics just like any other colors. I start by taking a dark gunmetal gray and thin it with the airbrush thinner. I base coat the figure with this gunmetal gray. This gives a very dark metallic blue-gray surface to start adding highlights onto. I then take my base coat and add some metallic blue into it. I also add just a little bit of metallic silver. I then begin to highlight the helmet and the raised areas of the uniform. I spray along the shoulders, the back, anywhere the color needs to be highlighted. I then light my paint once again by adding a bit more blue and a bit more silver. I highlight all the raised areas slowly, building up the lights from the darks with the metallics. It gives a very nice realistic metallic look. After referring to the painting the kit is based on, I notice there's a purple highlight on her, so I decide to mix a little metallic purple with a bit of the thinner and make a secondary color. I come in with purple and add highlights on the outfit. I follow where the highlights fall in the picture and try to match it up. If you don't have the painting to go by, just spray it sparingly around the figure. I use it underneath the breast, along the hip bone, the sides of the helmet, just here and there. I then add my final highlights using almost pure silver and just lightly spray along some of the raised areas, along the buttocks, the helmet, the shoulders, etc. Once the metallics are complete, I spray the entire figure with a couple of coats of gloss coat lacquer to give a nice shiny surface which also protects the paint. Another way to apply metallics is to dry brush them. This can be very effective. I start by base coating the figure with black. I'll be using Zeram 2 from Future Core. To dry brush, you begin by taking a dry brush, dip it in the paint, and wipe the majority of the paint back off. I take a dark metallic pewter and lightly fan stroke the color across the raised areas of the kit. By increasing the pressure of the brush, you can increase the amount of color that goes on your kit. You'll want to lightly brush the edges and let the black show through to give a natural shading. I then take my pewter gray and mix a little bit of silver in with it with just a touch of copper to lighten it up. Then once again, I build up my highlights over the area. I like to add in a secondary color to give it a more realistic look as opposed to a straight out-of-the-bottle look. I return to lighten the color again. I keep lightening up my shades and hitting the raised areas for variety. Because of all the bright lighting in the studio, the camera is picking up a lot of the color stronger than it looks in person. This effect is really very subtle. His coloring is still very dark, with the highlighted areas giving a sort of iron coloring to his uniform. An unusual effect when painting metallics is to layer transparent colors over it. I'm demonstrating on Beagle's Chrysalis Collector Kit. First, to start by priming the kit black. After this, I spray him with a base coat of chrome silver. I like the Rust-Oleum Chrome Metallic Finish spray paint, which is actually a lacquer-based paint and works really well over vinyl or resin. For this technique, I like to take clear, transparent colors like these from Tamiya. They make solvent-based acrylic clear coat paints in several colors such as clear blue, clear red, and they also have a clear. I take the clear paint and pour it into the jar and mix a little of the blue into it. I use the clear paint to lighten the blue instead of using thinner, as the paint with too much thinner would have a tendency to beat up on the surface. I begin by spraying a light coat of blue over the silver. Let the color build up into multiple layers. Work the paint well into the creases. This paint dries a bit slower than regular acrylic, so you might want to use a hairdryer to speed up the process. I then add more blue to the mix to intensify the color, and use a bit of thinner to thin it down and to help it flow through the airbrush. I then spray darker shades of blue along the creases and lines of the muscles of the kit. I then mix some clear paint with a clear red and apply it for a secondary color on the character. Once again, I like to thin it down with the airbrush thinner. I will later come back and deepen the color and add more layers of red to intensify the shades. This effect is really a lot of fun. You can take your time and build up the colors slowly with multiple layers. I'll eventually come back and add many shades of color before I'm finished. With metallic paint, remember, base coat the kit with black, lightly build up the shades from dark to light, and use a gloss coat to seal the finish. On Volume 1 of our series, I demonstrated how to paint a female face using basic techniques. On this tape, I'd like to elaborate on face painting and how to shade them with washes. For demonstrating faces, I'll be using Action Kit International's Jonathan Frid Barnabas Collins bust. I begin by base coating his face with a thin light shade of flesh. I then base coat his hair with black. I'll come back with washes and add shading around the eyes, underneath the chin, around the hairline, anywhere shadows would fall naturally. Washes are great because they give you a lot of control. I make my wash by adding airbrush thinner and adding a little bit of paint pigment. I start with burnt umber. You can add a touch of soap to the wash to keep it from beating up on the surface. I lightly put the washes in under the brow and work the color around. I come back with thinner on my brush and begin to work the color into the area, taking some of the pigment back off. I then come back with a Q-tip dipped in thinner and lightly dab along the edges to soften them. The thing about washes is that you have to work rather quickly since you don't want to have an edge where the wash begins to dry against the skin. Keeping it wet and dabbing it with a Q-tip is a good way to keep the edge smooth. You get a nice subtle shading against the hairline. I now come back and begin to work along the cheekbone with the wash, using that light rubbing motion once again. I then take the brush with just thinner on it and smooth out the line. This is a very up-close technique and takes a little more time, but is a lot of fun to do. The good thing about this technique is that since you always seal the kit with dull lacquer before starting, if you don't like the wash effect or you have overworked an area, you can always put thinner on a cloth and gently wipe off the washes and start over. I add shading underneath the nose, along the crease of the cheeks, under the chin line, wherever shadows need to fall. You can go back and layer your washes to achieve a darker shade. When I get to the point where I see something that I really like, I seal it with a coat of flat lacquer. The best places for washes on the face are under the hairline, the creases of the brow, under the brow, along the cheekbone, under the nose, along the crease of the cheeks, and under the jawline. I'm going to show doing washes for a cosmetic effect. They work great on kits such as Atomic Creations' Vampira. I base coated her face with a very pale flesh, and now I'm coming back with a very light purple wash. I take thinner and purple pigment to make the wash, and then apply it to the areas around her face. I return with my thinner and blend it along the hairline and cheekbone. Next, I take the purple and apply it underneath the brow and into the crease of the eye. I use a heavier shade because I want this to be more of a cosmetic effect. You can work that color up along the eyebrow ridge and let it dry there because the line will be hidden once you paint the eyebrow on. I come back and build up the shading, adding a little more purple into the corners of the eye. I want it darker in the corner and fade out more toward the outer edge of the eye. Here we see half the face shaded. You can see how the purple has added a cosmetic look to the eye and a little extra unusual color around the skin tone area. By painting the eyebrow on, it hides the line of the wash around the brow. For washes, seal the kit with lacquer before beginning washes. Work from light to dark. If your wash bleeds on the surface, add a touch of soap to the mixture. Use the airbrush thinner to blend the color. Seal the areas with flat lacquer when you're completed. Realistic eyes are the most important element to a face. They can really make or break your paint job. Here's some more details into how to obtain lifelike eyes. I begin base coating the eye with a warm oyster color made from white, burnt umber, raw sienna, and black. I base coat the orb of the eye with this shade. You don't want to use white because it would look too stark and too unrealistic. When you look at a person's eye, you'll see a pink ridge along the bottom edge and in the corner. I take a red oxide with a little of the base coat color and mix it together to paint this ridge. I place a little of this color in the corner of the eye and lightly line the bottom of the ridge with it. You don't see it on the top ridge because the eyelashes cover it. The next step is to line the eye. If you're going for a cosmetic effect, you can use black, but I'm going to use a dark brown so that it doesn't look like he's wearing makeup. I take the brush and I stroke along the inner edge of the upper lid. I then come back and lightly touch the outer edge of the eye. On the lower edge, you start with a thicker, wider stroke from the outside and get thinner as you move to the inner corner of the eye. You want that line to taper as you approach the inside corner. For painting the iris of the eye, I begin by blocking it in with black. This not only allows me to place where I want the iris to be, but also allows me to make sure both irises line up so they don't look cross-eyed. Even though Barnabas Collins has brown eyes, I'm going to demo with blue so it shows up better on the tape. I take blue and darken it down with a touch of black. Then I'll base coat the iris of the eye with blue. I like to leave just a sliver of black showing on the outside edge of the iris to define it just a bit more from the white. I lighten the blue and place highlights, usually a large highlight to the left of the iris and then one to the right. With a lighter shade of blue, I once again add a few smaller highlights on top of the earlier ones. Finally, I take my lightest shade of highlight blue and place a couple of very small highlights to the left and right of the other highlights. I then place the pupil, which is solid black. Finally, I mix white with my oyster gray base coat and add a light highlight to the outer edge of the iris in the whites of the eyes. This is still a light gray tone since you don't want to use white even for a highlight. And this is basically how you paint eyes. Now, if you ever want to do the eyes bloodshot, you can flat coat them with lacquer and come back with a wash of red in the corners. Gloss coat the eye to give it a lifelike effect. To recap eyes, add a warm light gray base coat, add a pink ridge to the corner and lower edge of the eye, add the upper lash line, lower lash line tapers toward the inside edge of the eye, blocking the iris with black, base coat the iris with the eye color, place the highlights in the iris, paint the pupil black, and place highlights in the whites of the eye. When you want to achieve details in the surface area of a kit, such as reptilian skin, you can build up the areas with washes, or a faster way is to make a glaze that you can wipe over the surface. I begin by painting my kit, adding all the highlights and spraying it down with flat lacquer. Taking a portion of Liquitex gel medium, I mix in the color that I want to use, in this case black and a little bit of dark brown. The great thing about making your own glazes is that you can make whatever color glaze you want. The mix is sort of a mayonnaise type consistency, so I want to thin this down with airbrush thinner until I get a smooth, brushable glaze. Liberally spread the glaze over a small section of the kit, and then taking a soft cloth, wipe it off. It leaves the glaze deposited down into the creases and crevices of all the texture. Use the same technique on Medusa. Brush it over the area, then wipe it off. Since her texture is not as deep, you might need to build it up in layers. You can also wipe in different directions to get different effects. This is a very simple technique that gives very dramatic results. You can do the same type of effect with washes, but it would take quite a few layers of washes to achieve it. This would only take you a few minutes with glaze. It's ideal for dinosaurs with all the textures and pebbling of their skin. Once again, I brush it over the surface and wipe it off. You see how it brings out all the individual scales. On Morphes, I've got the brightly colored reptilian skin, which once again I spread the gel over and then wipe off. The dark glaze helps to tie all those unusual colors together, making them look more natural and realistic. It also tones down some of the brightness of the colors. For glazing, seal the kit with flat lacquer. Thin the gel medium to a thick but smooth consistency. Work quickly in small areas. Brush it on and wipe it off. When building a vinyl kit, you're going to need a fillet for support. The property of vinyl is that you can soften it with heat for cutting, but this same property may cause your kit to sag or distort over time. Many of the manufacturers recommend filling a kit with plaster of Paris, but I prefer filling them with foam. For filling a vinyl kit with foam, you need to decide what type of foam you want to use. There are several brands of carpenter foam which you can purchase at a hardware store, which tends not to expand as much as I would like and takes a while to dry. I prefer Polyfoam Mountains in Minutes. It's a two-part mixture which is easy to control and dries very quickly. It's used a lot for model railroading dioramas and can be found in your model railroad stores. It expands to many times its initial mixture. I built a vinyl kit, sealing off the seams with putty work but leaving an opening to pour the foam down into. On a standard figure kit, I only fill the legs of the character. Because of the shape of the mirror, I want to fill the entire body. If you decide to fill the entire figure, you need to cut a vent hole somewhere not visible on the kit. On the Emir, I choose the bottom of the foot. This allows the air to escape from the kit while the foam is expanding. Sometimes if air is trapped inside and not allowed to escape, the kit can distort or collapse upon itself. Next, I put foil around the rim of the opening through which you pour the foam. This will protect the kit from spillover when the foam is expanding out of the hole. With polyfoam, you take equal amounts of part A and part B and mix them into a cup. It takes a very small amount to fill the kit. Probably only a couple of tablespoons of each will do the job. Mix it thoroughly into a sort of frothy mixture. Then pour it into the kit, holding the kit at an angle so that the foam goes down into the deepest section. In about a minute, the foam will start to heat up and expand. As the foam begins to set up, you can remove the foil. In about 5 minutes, the foam will begin to become very hard and rigid, and the excess can then be cut off. Foam is an easy way to fill a kit, while keeping it lightweight and avoiding the trapping of moisture inside, which can sometimes happen with plaster. For foam filling, build the kit and fill the seams with putty. Cut an air hole in an obscure place, and place foil around the hole to allow for spillover. Thanks for joining us for our second installment of Model Mania the video. I hope you picked up some useful information that will allow you to achieve better results with your modeling. The more success you have, the more you're going to want to do. And with that in mind, I hope to see you next time for Volume 3, Customizing and Dioramas. Now, I'd like to share with you some of the kits we worked with on Volume 2, as well as some from my private collection.
Kids.